Here we go. All right. So thank you all for being here. This we're going to look at one question from two different perspectives and try to see how denominational identity forms in the 20th century, and we'll see. I think yeah, lots of ways to directions to take this in terms of contemporary relevance. But I think these are sort of important just also for history as well. So this is a first source of tshuva by Chassam Sofer. Chassam Sofer was just an incredibly influential figure. He was Rosh Yeshiva in Pressburg in the Austro-Hungarian Empire in the 19th century, as traditional Jewish life is breaking down, as modernity is coming, as Reform Judaism emerges, as what's called neo-Orthodoxy emerges, and he generally takes a very hard line against changes in Jewish ritual, even though he was an incredibly innovative and creative posek. I see some more people have joined. I'm going to share this source sheet again.
Didn't he have the wealthy German merchants who wanted to bring reform to his city?
I don't know. I don't know. There's a lot for a history of this. Jacob Katz is one of the great Jewish historian. Wrote a book called, in English, it's called A House Divided, which is about sort of the schism into denominations in 19th century Hungary and into the 20th century.
I think Barry's next book is on the issue you're talking about.
Barry, really?
He's working on his, I think we're at his Patreon.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Okay, that would be really interesting. Okay, okay. That seems a little far afield from his last book, but great. Okay. Yeah, you can do whatever you want. Yeah. I'll just say, try to think. What else can I say? I'll say more later. Let's read this and then we'll see. Okay, so here's the question. A letter reached regarding an old synagogue that was demolished by the members of the community, and a larger building was built to replace it and to glorify the house of God. So lovely. We also remember, my wife is in Italy today. This week she's doing this, so she took some pictures of the Grand Synagogue in Rome as the ghettos come down, as restrictions on Jews, come down, the Enlightenment, as the ghetto walls come down. Jews build these like grand, beautiful, right? I mean, you've seen some of these, European, they're all from the second half of the 19th century. That's when Jews have the legal right and the financial ability to build these like grand synagogues that, so you have the ones that survive, which are these spectacular buildings, right? But they're
one reason that like this one.
Like this one, just like this one, yes.
One reason that they were so grand is that the architects didn't know what a synagogue was, and they modeled it after cathedral.
Yeah, well, Jews didn't know what it was either. You know what I mean? The Jews did. They also like what's Jewish? Like what is synagogue architecture? Like I don't think we had that same necessarily with like a architectural tradition, or that's a separate question, right? But the Jews also thought it should look like a church because that's what a religious building should look like. They didn't have any authentic I don't know, like what's synagogue architecture supposed to look like? I don't know, like what would you, if you weren't modeling it on some other religion's house of worship, what would you think it should look like? Okay, fine. It's
we have the ones here in DC that are modeled after Muslim influences.
That was a stage. That was also in 19th, like the Moorish influence in architecture. That was a way. Again, that was trying to be. There was a whole period where modern European Jews were very infatuated with Sephardic Jewry in Europe. They thought Sephardic Jewry was more because there was less anti-Semitism in the Muslim world, and there was sort of they felt, and they were philosophers, and they were whatever. So they felt like sort of it was a more aesthetically, at least, they sort of was like a real affinity for like Sephardic Judaism, not as a authentic. It's like
it's exotic.
It's exotic, but also in a good way, in a positive way. So that's why, like in New York, Central Synagogue in New York is from that time period. It has sort of a Moorish architectural. This is I think I've shared already at least 90% of what I know about synagogue architecture. So I don't know if I have much.
Rabbi, I heard somewhere that in Europe, when Jews were finally allowed to build synagogues of their own, they asked an architectural guild for advice on how they should build a synagogue, and they were specifically told not to copy the Christian like classical style, and so that's why they were sort of pushed to the Moorish architectural style.
So Rachel, who knows about, she's a historical preservationist, and so she says the Moorish style was trying not to copy Christian architecture. Okay, interesting. There's a good thing to Rav Soloveitchik has a letter. It's published about when Brandeis built the Catholic Jewish and there was those chapels. There was a letter because they originally was one interfaith chapel, and he wrote anyway, that but mark that down. Something else, further research. It's published in that English collection of his letters, Community, Covenant. Kind of is that Natty Helfgott edited Soloveitchik's letters in English, and there's a letter there about the Brandeis Interfaith Chapels. It's okay. Also, in terms of like what is Jewish architecture in this effort to Anyway, they tore down the synagogue, new synagogue. They want to put the bima from which the Torah is read at the front of the synagogue. They want a big stage at the front of the synagogue, and the bima is going to be there and it's going to be read from there, just next to the Aron Kodesh, not in the middle, as it had been, saying that it's nicer and more spacious in this way than if the bima is in the middle. And his very soul is bound up in his question. Is it appropriate to do this or not? Understand the question? Ever seen a synagogue with a bima in the front? Can you imagine such a thing? Okay. So all right. So that's the question. All right.
Well, today's age, it feels like the Sfardim do it in the middle and we do it towards the front.
This was this established custom in shuls with the bimas in the middle, and the question they want to do in the front, they think is more spacious. You have more seating, you can fit more people there. You have a stage in the front. You can, right, it's much more grand. Okay. The answer, he goes as follows. You yourself correctly said the Rambam who explained that we build the lecture and the bima in the middle of the synagogue so that everyone can hear equally. And the Torah and the Ramah wrote similarly, and anyone who changes anything has the burden of proof. In Hebrew, v'kol mishaneh yado ala tachtona. That's a general halachic principle. You want to change, you have the burden of proof, right? The precedent carries a lot of weight. The established custom is going to be, we're going to maintain that unless we have really strong evidence to undo it. And so, kol mishaneh yado ala tachtona. Okay, so it seems like we build synagogues, the bima is in the middle, and that's why you hear better that way. That was understood to be how you can hear better, and so you put the bima in the middle. However, the Kesef Mishnah is the commentary on the Rambam written by Rabbi Joseph Caro, known to us as the Shulchan Aruch. I mean, known to us also as the Kesef Mishnah, but his more famous book is the Shulchan Aruch. He also wrote a commentary on the Rambam. Kesef Mishnah wrote in order to provide post facto justification for those locations in foreign lands where the bima was in the front of the synagogue. And he wrote, those communities consider this law to be only for the circumstances where communities were large and the reader's voice could not be heard if the bima were not in the middle of a synagogue. However, to our great misfortune in our small communities, one can hear even if the bima is at the front of the synagogue. Okay, so the Kesef Mishnah, according to the Chassam Sofer, we can, look inside the Kesef Mishnah and see, if we agree with his characterization. The Kesef Mishnah says that since the whole point is pragmatic, we want the people in the shul to be able to hear what's being said. So if it's a small enough shul, you could have the bima in the front and everyone can hear just as well. Like it doesn't mean anything. It's just this is how we can make sure people can hear well, and then we'll do it this way. But if it's a smaller community and it's not such a big shul, so we can have it in the front, right? That's the Kesef Mishnah. But he says no, that's just to be ex post facto justification. But yeah, they already built it this way. Okay, so it's fine. What's really important is that you can hear what's being said. And this matter is a long section in the Talmud, and in Masechet Sukkah regarding the men of Alexandria. Alexandria in history as well as in the Talmud was a very, very large Jewish community. I think they were massacred in anti-Semitic riots in the 2nd century. But one time it was an incredibly large Jewish community. Like, according to some accounts, hundreds of thousands of Jews lived in Alexandria. Even if those numbers are inflated, it was a very large community. And the Talmud records that the synagogue in Alexandria didn't have electronic amplification. So how would they make sure that people could hear, to respond amen to the brachot in the synagogue? So they couldn't hear. They would have flags. They would raise a flag and everyone would say amen at the same time. Cool, right?
They didn't even know what they were saying amen to.
Well, then presumably it was something good.
Does it even count?
Yeah, apparently it does. I mean, that's the discussion in the Talmud in the second. Yeah, that's how it counts, why it counts, how that works. Is generally it's amen yatoma, an orphan's amen. If you don't hear the bracha, there's a gap. So that's discussed in the Talmud. It's and what so that would be a separate. We have a shiur on amen and how it works. So we look at that question. But how is he going to use it? And the Kesef Mishnah is written in order to provide post-fact justification for those communities whose practice against what the Talmud calls for. However, it seems to me that the communities have made an error for Alexandria, where they could not hear, needed to rely on signs, and nonetheless had the beam in the middle, even though they could see the signs being waved just as easily if they were in front, and 2 sets of signs being set up if necessary. And even so, they do not consider it appropriate to set up the synagogue in this way. In other words, this case of Alexandria shows us that even where the rationale of this is how you can be heard isn't relevant because it's so big and you can't hear there, they still didn't put the beam in the front, right? So the Chassam Sofer is saying it's not a pragmatic rule about this is how we can hear better. It's actually something essential about how a synagogue is supposed to be built. And from this reason, we can argue that since we consider the bima from which the Torah's descriptions of sacrifices read to be like the mizbeach. So what's the idea? So the shulchan where the Torah is read is like the mizbeach. We read about the korbanot, from the Torah on this table. This table then is like our mizbeach. It's like our altar, and we circle the mizbeach on Sukkot when we say Hoshanot. Okay, and the mizbeach that's stood in the heichal in front of the Aron HaKodesh was the golden mizbeach upon which the ketor was burned. That mizbeach was also in the middle of the mikdash between the menorah and the showbread table. So all of them there's a big mizbeach outside where the korbanot were offered. That's in the courtyard, and then inside the building itself, inside the mikdash, there was a smaller golden altar. That one was also not right in front. There was a space between that and the Aron and the actual parochet that went to the Kodesh Kodashim, and the shulchan where the showbread was on was across from it. So it wasn't like up against the wall. It was also in the middle. Rashi explains there, explaining the Talmud as well, and the Rambam. And since our bima is towards the front, like the inner mizbeach, all the same, it should be in the middle of the synagogue, similar to the Beit HaMikdash, as much as possible. And we should not alter our the Migdash Me'at Shalanu. Okay, our synagogue is modeled on the Beit HaMikdash. Our synagogue, again, that's authentic synagogue architecture. It has the form and the structure, symbolically, right? It's like a miniature Beit HaMikdash. We have the Torah scrolls, just like the Luchot. We're in an Aron. Our Torah scrolls in an Aron. There's a curtain or a parochet, just like in the Beit HaMikdash. And the Shulchan is like the Mizbeach, the altar. So it should be in the middle. So he's giving an entirely new, right? He's sort of saying this rule, which we had thought was about how you hear better, is actually like definitional to a synagogue as a Migdash Ma'at, as a miniaturized Beit HaMikdash. And even according to the Kesef Mishnah, provided a rationale to explain the practice of communities who act differently. Nonetheless, his words are not relevant for us, for did not our ancestors build the synagogues with a beam in the middle? We see from this that they consider it better that way to let the people hear. And praise be to God, the community has not shrunk. On the contrary, it has grown, praise be to God. And therefore, even if it had initially been built to the front of the synagogue, that would have been because the community was small. And if the building is to be built for a larger community, it undoubtedly must have the beam in the middle. And God forbid that we change anything from the way it was. Okay? In other words, the Kesef Mishnah says maybe a small congregation they could hear just as well. It's a really small community. The bima is in front. But this community, where the questions being asked, this European community, the bima was in the middle before, and now it's a bigger building. So certainly it should stay in the middle. And God forbid again, Halila, Lishniye Mashaya. God forbid we should change anything the way it was. It's like how many Orthodox rabbis it take to change a light bulb? Change, right? Okay, that's the answer. Okay, all right, that's what he said. Okay, that's okay. All right, thank you for laughing. Okay, and it seems to me further that those communities that even the Kesef Mishnah would agree that one cannot make a change in location where there was already a synagogue with a beam in the middle, right? Because again, he's just sort of justifying a practice that, again, according to Chassam Sofer, Kesef Mishnah, Chassam Sofer in the 19th century, characterizing Kesef Mishnah, writing in the 16th century about some communities where the bima was not in the middle and justifying it, but he's saying again, that's only b'diavad. That's where it was already built that way in the proper way to kind of justify that, but that would not permit a redesigned, rebuilt synagogue from having the bima in front. The Pesikta says, brought up in the Yerushalmi, that's Jerusalem Talmud, and you shall erect the Mishkan according to its rules that I showed to you on Mount Sinai. Are there rules for the Mishkan's boards? Rather, a board that, so what does that mean, right? This is a midrash halakha, a board that merited being on the north does not change its location from the south. And from here, Maharal learned about nails that are used to make a sukkah. And it seems to me that even though Jerusalem and the temple courtyards can be expanded and will be inevitably include some changes, nonetheless, we do not change the location of something that was in the north to place in the south, and something that was in the middle, should be placed somewhere else. Okay, so that's a rule for the Mishkan. They had these like wooden kirashim that built comprised the Mishkan. And when you took it apart and loaded it up on the wagons and moved it from place to place, and you reassembled it, you had to keep the boards in the same place. They were numbered, I guess, okay, or at least on the same orientation. And so too, in this
Mafia did that with their sukkah, put them on the same place, so they don't have to go right.
Right, exactly. And the Beit HaMikdash as well. Even though they expanded the Beit HaMikdash, the second Beit HaMikdash was bigger than the first one, and then Herod made renovations. They expanded the Azarah, the Har HaBayit was expanded. Nonetheless, they kept everything in the right place. They didn't move anything from where it was located. Even though the second Beit HaMikdash was bigger, they kept everything where it had been. Even though, according to the measurements of the current synagogue building, its middle is not in the same place as the middle of the old synagogue. Right. So they're moving. If it's a bigger building, maybe slightly different location, the middle might not be the actual same latitude and longitude, right? Okay, when you rebuild it, but it still has to be in the same relative location to the rest of the building, which should be in the middle. And then he says, "V'haklal." And what's the general rule? Hachadash asur min Torah b'chol makom. Okay, anything new is forbidden by the Torah in every instance. And so too here. Okay, fine. This became sort of a mantra of Chassam Sofer. He wrote about it in a number of locations. It's a pun. Okay, Chadash is new wheat, right? That grows before you're not allowed to eat. Torah says you're not allowed to eat wheat until after the second day of Pesach. So the wheat has to wait. It's Chadash. You can't eat it until the second day of Pesach. And when the Chazal talk about Chadash, Asur min Torah, B'chol Makom, they mean even outside of, normally agricultural mitzvot are only pertain in Eretz Yisrael, but Chadash, that prohibition pertains also in Chutz La'aretz. So to say Chadash Asur min Torah, B'chol Makom, what it actually means is no matter where you live, you can't, this prohibition against eating new grain applies. He turned it into a pun to oppose innovations in Jewish ritual practice. Chadash Asur min Torah, B'chol Makom. This is one of the founding. He writes a number of tshuva where this phrase appears. This is like a founding document of orthodoxy, which is distinct from traditional Judaism that had preceded it insofar as it is a self-conscious defense of tradition in the face of alternatives, as opposed to unself-conscious maintaining traditional practices. Right? He's saying he's saying this practice, which according to Kesef Mishnah was just about pragmatic, it was just about how do we hear better? He's saying, no, it's a tradition that has religious meaning. It connects our synagogue to the Beit HaMikdash. It's sort of what a synagogue is supposed to be. And so, and so he defends, he elevates the prohibition and sort of accentuates what's wrong about it with this added phrase, Chadash Asur min Torah b'chol makom. We don't innovate, we don't make new things. In fact, again, Chassam Sofer was an incredibly innovative, creative posek. But when it came to these types of issues, his attitude was, we're not going to fight the battle on our home territory. We're going to try to fight the battle as far away as possible from, like, make our front line, we're going to defend these customs and these practices rather than fight about things that are really essential as sort of a strategy for these confrontations. Yeah.
It's just interesting. I've always learned that debate's not over being in the middle, but where the Chazan starts from, currently bottom, it was moved from the Chazan being in front of the Chazan himself being in front. I've never seen this. I've seen the other argument so many times.
So this was one of the things that defined orthodoxy from non-orthodoxy in Hungary, in the 19th century. Like this was, wherever again. So religious reforms came to Western Europe this is 1830, 1840s. There are religious reforms all through Central Europe. Orthodoxy, as I said, is a self-conscious rejection of religious reform, and really with an attitude often of Chadash Asur min Torah, like we're going to defend all of these practices, not going to give in. And that's a self-conscious awareness of a separate identity. In Hungary, what happens is, and later, this is 1830, by 1860s, 1870 or so, I wish I should have looked at the dates. There's a generation later, there's a full-fledged schism in the Jewish community, first in Hungary and then in Germany. And what that schism meant was that the Jewish community, which was integrated into the government, into the state, split into two. And so you were just a Jew, right? You're a Christian or you're a Jew, and you're part of the Jewish community, and you got married, in the Jewish community, got buried in the Jewish community, and, the old age home was run by the Jewish community, the hospitals, all of that was run by the Kihila. The Kihilot all split into two. And that was, the Orthodox asked for that. The Orthodox, we can't be part of a Kihila that isn't run by us according to our principles and okay. And so they got the right first in Hungary and then in Germany to secede and create their own Orthodox separate communities, which meant that the cemetery, meaning you couldn't be, if your synagogue voted to join the Orthodox Kehillah, then you would not be buried in the cemetery where your parents and your grandparents and where your ancestors have been buried for 1,000 years. That cemetery was close to you because you were no longer part of that Kehillah. Okay, it was a very, very fierce debate. And the issues that divide, and everything, and the issues that were the borderline included things like where the bima is in shul. If the shul had the bima in the front, it wasn't an Orthodox synagogue. Weddings in synagogues were considered completely not Orthodox. Orthodox could not have a wedding in a synagogue. That was a totally copied from the Christians, have a church wedding, right? You would not have a wedding and take place in a synagogue. Jewish weddings take place outside, right, under the stars. A wedding in a synagogue was a non-Orthodox practice. They, sermons in the vernacular. Okay, that was another, big, mixed gender choirs, or non-Jews playing an organ on Shabbat. These were issues. None of these were d'oraita. None of these were concerned Torah prohibitions. according to like what, none of these, let's say, obvious Torah prohibitions, but they were understood to be like kind of a part of something bigger. And in many ways, they were part of something bigger. And this is where those lines were drawn. At least in Germany, there were even in Hungary, there were synagogues called status quo synagogues, where that faced with that dilemma of like, of being forced to choose and then being cut off from this, that we're not going to join either national organization of synagogue, we're just going to stay the way things were. They're called status quo synagogues, and that became its own denomination in Hungary. So there were the Orthodox, congregations, there were the Neolog congregations, and then there were status quo congregations. But that was considered, the Orthodox considered status quo as not being Orthodox. Like if you were a chazan, if you were hired as a chazan to serve in a status quo congregation for like Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, and you worked as a shochet the rest of the year, your meat was not considered kosher. And they were like that. That's how divisive that was.
The Orthodox changed back from the status quo being what?
Say it again.
What was the status quo?
Status quo was there was no such thing as a national Jewish organization. They were just a kehillah, the way it had always been for 1,000 years. And when Jews had lived in Hungary for 1,000 years, they weren't, as with the ghettos breaking down, with emancipation, there was a national organization of Jews, and that would be the government would interact with them, and they would take care of whatever response, and they said, we're not going to join either organization. We just want to leave us alone. And that was,
So they didn't shoot. They didn't shoot. The synagogues didn't change. They didn't shoot.
Exactly. Same practices, same minhagim, same everything.
It was all politics. Their observances were still.
There was politics. It was affiliation. I mean, it was about affiliation. It was about identity and affiliation. We'll see.
So would that be considered traditional today?
I don't know. Like every country was different, meaning the issues were different, and the tradition was like that's like a Midwestern kind of breed of like uniquely Midwestern. The mid 20th century Midwestern. I'd say that's its own story. In Germany, when Sam Shmuel Hirsch got through the German-Prussian parliament the right to secede and form a separate separatist Orthodox community, which he felt like the part Judaism was about was about all aspects of life. So you couldn't have a Jewish kehillah that wasn't dedicated to Torah and mitzvot as Orthodoxy understood it. So you couldn't have a kehillah where there are people making communal decisions and allocating money, and it's all an expression of our values as a people. And so it had to be entirely Orthodox under his conception. So he got that right for Orthodox to succeed. But some of the greatest Orthodox rabbis in Germany disagreed and felt it was appropriate to remain part of the general Jewish community. They were called, so there were two types of Orthodox synagogues in Germany. There were the Gemeinde Orthodox, who were part of the general, and there were the Austritt Orthodox, who were separate and didn't join the general. And they had separate cemeteries, right? Separate schools, separate nursing homes, separate cemeteries, separate schools.
It's also taxing.
Yeah, because you pay taxes, and the government would allocate the taxes to support. It's still today, and still like that in many parts of Europe. In Hungary, so in Germany, the Austritt community and the Gemeinde community remain separate cemeteries. One in, I think in Frankfurt, where this started, there was a wall between the two cemeteries. That apparently was an Allied bomb that destroyed the wall during the Second World War. So there's no longer this division between those two versions of Orthodox Jewish cemeteries in Frankfurt. At least in Hungary, in the last year, actually, the Orthodox community in Hungary that Chassam Sofer, that his students got the right to form, was taken over by Chabad. So there's actually no longer an Orthodox. There's no longer an independent Orthodox community in Hungary. The government didn't want to get into it. It's been a bit. You can find it was like written up in the press. It was like a bit of a controversy over the last 6 months, and so anyway.
Traditional Judaism in the Midwest was much more like 1850s forms. People were still trying to live Orthodox-ish lives, but wanting.
I'll say this. We'll jump ahead to the 20th century in America, in each of these places, the issues that divided Orthodoxy from non-Orthodoxy were a little bit different. So the Bima was very important, as we saw in 1830 in Hungary. In the United States in the 20th century, the dividing line that emerges between the Orthodoxy and conservative movements ends in the 1950s, ends up being the Mechitza. And one reason why the Mechitza became an issue that divided, as it were, Orthodoxy from other synagogues was that civil courts could tell if you had one or not. Okay, so you could sue your synagogue for taking out a mechitza. If the bylaws of the synagogue said we're an Orthodox synagogue, you could sue that the synagogue's practice was violating its bylaws if they instituted mixed seating. Whereas nothing else, like you couldn't say, if you went and said my rabbi is teaching heresy, like this court is not going to decide that, right? But if you could say, no, the synagogue took out its mechitza, and according to the bylaws, we have to an Orthodox synagogue, so the courts were willing to weigh in. And so in the 1950s, that became an issue. And the traditional synagogues in the Midwest were Orthodox synagogues that didn't feel the mechitza was the issue that was going to divide Orthodox from non-Orthodox. But as that issue became the issue, it did, and that's why that was sort of the kind of the atrophying of those traditional synagogues. There's like, I think there's like, I don't know, like in the 1980s, there were a handful of them were still members of the OU, and they were, only high Orthodox rabbis. I think there are, it's like, I don't think there are 5 left that are in that,
Also, for them, it was also Yiddish originally. They were what first excluded. My grandparents were going to synagogue.
Okay.
My great uncle was the key witness in the case where they said, mechitza is the issue.
Interesting, fascinating.
In Kansas City, there's still a very big one.
There's one in Kansas City. That's right. I don't know if it's an OU synagogue anymore. It might not be, but there's one in Kansas City.
They actually run the OU and the mix of the whole community.
Okay, so then there's okay, great, Kansas City. All right, so okay, so now let's go back to Bima in the middle. Okay, this is Igros Moshe. The rest, I think, the next we have 2 tshuvot, I think, here that are all from Moshe Feinstein. Okay, we're going to suspend. Moshe Feinstein dies in 1985, I believe, 1986. Started his career in Soviet Russia, came to America, and by the 1950s is the predominant posek in America and one of the greatest scholars to ever live here. Here's his, okay. Regarding the issue of a bima in the middle of the synagogue, certainly it should be placed in the middle, but ask the question of whether one may pray in a synagogue that does not have it in the middle, it's not appropriate to forbid based on this. I don't see grounds to forbid attending a synagogue with a beam in the front. So he's saying this is not a boundary definition for Orthodoxy. Yes, the beam belongs in the middle, but this is not a boundary definition for us in America in 1959. And regarding that which was said in Hungary, that's forbidden. I do not fully understand the basis for that. It must have been something limited to that time and place as a measure to combat reform. It's kind of ironic, right? He's sort of saying, like the halakha is contextual to combat, it was a halakhic innovation to combat the reform halakhic innovations, right? So he's saying, so what was the innovation was this strict prohibition against praying in a synagogue with the beam in the wrong place, but like that was there and that was really focused on combating reform. For in those places, this was the beginning of reform, but in other places where the intent of moving the beam was not for reform, rather there should be more seats or for some other similar reason, there's no reason for praying there. For beam location is not one of the essential rules of the sanctity of the synagogue. Mechitza is, he thinks, right, but not the beam location. Rather, so the purpose of making sure that all the worshipers can hear the Torah reading as explicit in the Ramah, and there's also mentioned the Rambam, okay, and the Kesef Mishnah is lenient even ab initio in small synagogue, even lechatchila. Chassam Sofer says Kesef Mishnah is lenient bidi evid after the fact, but Moshe says no, it's lechatchila, it's even ab initio in small synagogues. And therefore, even though it's obviously preferable to place the bima in the middle, so as not to change the custom of our land, and see to Chassam Sofer, who gives a new reason for his own thinking for why to prohibit the bima in the middle. Chassam Sofer, we saw he invents this idea about the modeling of the Beit HaMikdash, even though this reasoning is not conclusive, unless it's certainly appropriate. Okay, I usually made that up, but it's nice, but that's not a reason to say it's forbidden to pray in the synagogue. Okay, so we should be sensitive where we can, but to prohibit prayer, even according to his reasons, there is no place. Even by Chassam Sofer, right? With the bima, if the bima is in the middle, it reflects the Beit HaMikdash. And so wonderfully, we want our synagogues to be modeled on the Beit HaMikdash, and that doesn't in itself give rise to a prohibition against praying in a synagogue where they do it wrong. And the truth is that there are rumors that in some places it was prohibited. That was only a temporary decree in their land because of reform. And if there are 2 synagogues, one with the beam in the middle and one with it at the end, make a settled prayer location with the beam in the middle, since that's great appropriately. So you should definitely, all things being equal, go to the place where the beam is in the right place, which is in the middle. But this is not a boundary definition. There's no prohibition to pray in a synagogue where they do it wrong. The stakes are not that high. And the stakes were really high in Hungary because that was the issue that the reform movement, sort of made their first, innovation. But without that historical context, we don't have to care that much about where the bima is in our synagogues. Questions, comments? Someone characterized to me the difference between Moshe and Chassam Sofer. Chassam Sofer felt take the fight to the enemy, as it were, not the enemy. Take the fight as far as, we want to defend the maximal border that we can. So we're not fighting about our core principles. We'll fight about the location of the bima. We're not going to fight about things that are core. Moshe felt the opposite. He felt, no, let's let's be flexible with everything that isn't essential so that we can really stand our ground where things really matter. Somebody in the chat, sorry, I'm not paying attention, wrote, two questions. So one is that why Chabad still marries under the sky, not inside? Yes. So yeah, exactly. So Chabad weddings take place under the sky. That is when traditional Jewish weddings take place, period. I was at a wedding hall recently where they had like a glass window, skylight. Yes, that maybe accommodates. But I think the synagogue weddings was a 19th century, copying reform. But I think over time it just lost that sense of like that's why we're doing it. It's a lot of other wedding, white dress and flower girls and processions. These are all imitations of Christian weddings. I think these are all imitations of not just any Christian wedding. These are imitations of, I think, Queen Victoria's wedding. I think the modern wedding was modeled on Queen Victoria's wedding, and we do all of our from weddings at Marina Del Rey, whatever. They're all based on Queen Victoria's wedding, and I think So I think just in terms of like, if it has connotations, it's a problem. If it doesn't have bigger connotations, we can be flexible. If we have a little more self-confidence, then we don't have to defend, quite. Next question. We talk about bima. What are we talking about, and what is supposed to take place on the bima? Such as some shuls have the shulchan in the middle of the shul where laning takes place, and the Dvar Torah happens in the front. Other shuls have the laning and Dvar Torah in the front. Bima means So I think here it's like where the prayers are led from and where the Torah is read from, which and that
Laterals have
like an amud, like a stand, but it's still facing forward.
facing forward, but in the front.
Yeah, but it's not like directly. Yeah, I think that still counts as in the middle because there is space between. Even if he's standing in the front from an amud, he's not. Yeah, he's not on the stage, and he's facing front, and there's space between him and the Aaron Kodesh.
That's where differentiating. I thought that there was, so I see that what I always done was there's the stem in the front, the amud is a step down, you cry out from the depths.
That was an old, that's in the Talmud, it talks about yo red lifnei teva, go down before the ark. I assume they sat in kind of like they had tiered seating that went around the sides and the back, and you would like go down to stand, you'd be leading from below everyone else. That's my understanding of the ancient synagogue.
Sometimes old synagogue,
Mm-hmm.
if you go to Turkey's older synagogue, you're gonna step up clear that middle central place.
Yeah, correct. You'd read Torah from that middle place. Yeah. So I'm not exact. So I don't know quite what I assume the Torah is being read is what he's referring to. That's like the Mizbech right in the middle where the reading. Yeah, but I think, yeah. And in the modern, in the more like, certainly like the liberal congregations where it's all from the front and they're facing out. Like that's much more. That's clearly what what's being condemned here in these various degrees, right? Where they're facing forward and they're like just flush against the Aaron.
I was growing about Shalom, the plaza actually the amud facing out, like on
Oh, facing the ark from on the bima.
Well, it used to be that way here.
Right. Yeah. Correct. Yeah. Someone else says, is there anything that has to do with seeing the person? Seeing, I don't think. Being able to listen to the person, yes. So again, that's Ari. So that's because Mishnah seems to think it's pragmatic. Some Sofer seems to say no, it's not pragmatic. It's not like the essential nature of the synagogue that has to be this way. And Moshe Feinstein is saying better to be in the middle, but it doesn't really. It's not a defining line for orthodoxy, and it's okay. And Joel is saying the Beit HaMikdash connection seems ironic to me since one criticism was reformers called shuls temples, right? They were the ones that they said, like, we don't yearn for a temple in Jerusalem. Our synagogue is our temple. They call them temples. And yet some Sofer are saying, no, like we're actually modeling our shul on the Beit HaMikdash. There's an irony there. Good.
So I think it's important for understanding the Sam Sofer that he really had to make a central crisis because you had all these German merchants that came from Germany, was spread throughout Central Europe, and they had the money and they were supporting, and then they wanted to practice this in our shuls. Why can't it be like at home? So they
interesting
practices. So these were the pillars of the community. He was having to fight.
He was fighting his battle. That's okay. That could be. That's okay.
So,
Yeah.
Our shul has a bima in the front, but
Yeah.
also a shulchan in the middle. Like, does that mean that, like, in the past, this building was used as like not an orthodox shul?
It just means that it was this when 1960 when it's built like this when Moshe Feinstein is saying it really should be in the middle, but if it's not, you can still go there. He had in mind a synagogue just like this one. Okay, where and then I assume imagine where Hirschfeld came, he brought it back to the middle in line with sort of a more emerging consensus of Orthodox shuls, where we're a little more self-confident in Orthodox, we don't have to.
That's why we have the crazy.
That's why the Mefitza was sort of, yeah, exactly.
I
Yeah.
wonder what happened, what Flavor did, or maybe he never got it in there.
No,
No.
you were probably facing the arrow when you dive from up top.
Yeah,
Right?
for sure.
To turn that around, and actually, you can hear much better.
Yeah.
Ironically,
Yeah.
because of the acoustics.
It's built for the, yeah.
Facing the arrow
Int-
and talking, like when you give your devar.
Yeah.
You would probably project better.
If I face the other way? Okay. Yeah,
It was
yeah.
terrible, but-
Interesting. Interesting.
There probably is more and more synagogues that there was, they didn't beam on the.
Yeah, but also like 1960s, like it's like the nadir for American Orthodoxy, right? We could really, again, it's like you had these waves of immigrants came in between 1880 and 1914. And so by 1960, their children and grandchildren were predominantly non-Orthodox. Most people in Orthodox synagogues were not observant. And the younger generation, like the vast majority of people who would attend an Orthodox synagogue in 1960 were not Shomer Shabbat by anyone's definition. And their children, like the conservative movement had taken over the suburbs. And so just if you think of what a synagogue should be like, and we're going to build a grand new synagogue building on 16th Street in Shepherd Park. So we're going to make it look like a grand synagogue. So of course the people's going to be for that's how a modern synagogue should be. And we're going to have bucket seats because we're going to sit in our comfy seats and listen to the chazan, right? Okay. Another one more. Yeah. All right. They're not going to be starting bucket seats. There's a lot to say about bucket seats. Okay. Yeah. Okay. This one regarding a synagogue, we should place there in the show flags of the United States and the state of Israel, and because of this, some do not want to pray there. Does this have a basis? Okay, so here's another kind of 1957, another 50s and 60s kind of thing that a lot of synagogues, they put flags in the synagogue, and people, we want to enable from a breakaway shul, so we don't have to, because it's like not so frum to have flags in the shul. What about that? So it's a long. I think I only translated some of it here, right? Because it's like a separate shiur for a separate topic. He says basically it's not Avodah Zarah. They're not worshiping the flags. They're just they're there to show their appreciation for the country, and so you don't have to like read too much into it. The flag is not it's not an object of devotion, so it's not Avodah Zarah, and so it's basically fine. But he doesn't like, it's not a traditional thing to put flags in shul. He doesn't like it. Then he says, however, those who wish to make their own minyan in another place. Let me read this in Hebrew because I'm going to turn it and read it in. I underlined it in Hebrew. Okay, it's on the bottom next page. Okay. These people, they want to make their own minyan someplace else. They're a little frum breakaway minyan without flags. They think that by this they're doing something really great. They're going to make a frum shul where no flags. They're not acting appropriately. Politica mitzad koach hayetzer. Okay, this is just politics that comes from the yetzer. This is like the evil inclination that's tempting them to want to make this frum breakaway shul. V'asatan asher ba'avotenu harabim miraked beinan ad asher yirachem Hashem. Okay, and it's Satan is dancing among us through our great sins until Hashem has mercy on us. V'shachlanu hagoel tzedek v'yareh leinu ruach memarom alechet b'derech haTorah v'amet levulim toj yaminu small. Okay, until God in God's mercy sends us the righteous Redeemer who will awaken us with a spirit from above to walk in the path of the Torah and truth without deviating to the left or the right. Your friend Moshe Feinstein. So what you see here is he clearly states his preference that shul should not have flags. The kind of synagogues he's describing, again, 1950s, 1960s, Orthodox shuls, Big Tent Orthodox shuls, most of the members aren't observant. Bima's in the front, there are flags, okay.
That mixed dancing.
They had balls, fundraiser, mixed dancing, right? But to separate, but it's an Orthodox shul. And because of that, the kind of the drive to form a breakaway and like a firm breakaway is nothing more than Satan dancing among us and the Yetzer Hara and politics and don't separate from the shul, even though it's like not so firm. So like there's a sort of a sense in which that once that Orthodox identity is affirmed and strengthened, he's very tolerant of like whatever you got to do to like keep the people in the seats and like connect to them. You do what you got to do. There's a yeah.
Well, I just like a few things going on here. Sometimes. There's one you said. One is, this is immediately post World War II, post establishment of the state of Israel, right? Let's say early to mid 50s. So there's a lot of patriotism.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And so this just seems like a very natural thing for mid-century American Jews.
Yes.
Second thing is, if you allow these breakaways, then it'd be then the shuls would be non-orthodox in 2 minutes, right? If all the most fluent people left. So I assume in the back of his mind, he's thinking, we gotta keep these shuls together so that they'll, like you just said, people be exposed and they'll have some semblance of.
I think that's good. So in the Bible, the part that we skipped, he talks about, people love the country and they want to show their respect for Israel, and that's why they have the flags. And don't be too alarmed by it. That's sort of a natural and even perhaps a positive feeling. Don't be too alarmed by it. I think you're right that he sort of felt the value of everyone diving together, like the people can have a positive influence and people stay connected to something that he thinks is true and important. There's a series of tshuva. Rav Kook wrote a tshuva in the earlier. This was in the 1920s to Australia. Somebody wrote to Rav Kook and they said, do you think it's appropriate that a synagogue president, the leader, he's the president and he's the chazan and he's the mohel, but he's not Shomer Shabbos and he keeps his store open on Shabbos and he's like married to a Gentile. Like, is this really appropriate? And Rav Kook says, of course it's not appropriate. Like you can't have like the chazan and the mohel and the shul president, be someone who's not, minimally observant to that standard. And then he got a second letter from, and that letter that was sent to, that was sent by the neighbor, like the Reform synagogue down the street, sent you that letter. And this guy who is like, the married to a Gentile, keeps the store open on Shabbos, who's the mohel and the chazan and he's the only one keeping this Orthodox shul open. If it weren't for him, there would be no Orthodox synagogue in our city. Okay. So like, and of course, okay, in that case, fine, so like everything. So it's a great example of like the same, just little different context. You expand your aperture, a few more facts come in and the answer can be very different.
I kind of see an allusion to Sinat Hinam here.
Totally. Yeah. We elevate our differences, the narcissism of small differences. We say, like, we sort of look for ways to make ourselves feel special by, making distinction between us and other people. And that can be very hard. It's natural, but it's very harmful. Okay, it's another very famous long tshuva of Moshe Feinstein. Also similar kind of like endorsement of Big Ten Orthodoxy. Even it's a very strict tshuva. 1953 says, can you be or isur sheyesh b'hazminat anashim sheyavo lipalo v'et hakneset b'Shabbat k'sheyodin sheyavo b'machines. Okay, this is 1953. Okay, can you invite people to come to shul if you know they're going to drive? And he says you absolutely cannot. By the way, he says you can't invite people. Right now, in 1953, again, the vast majority of Orthodox synagogues, certainly anyone, in the Lower East Side, people walk because no one had a car. But in the suburbs, Orthodox in 1953, everyone drove. Okay, to synagogue. Right? There was like very, very small numbers of Shomer Shabbos, or they took the subway. Okay, it was a very small number of them. I mean, there's a minority of membership in Orthodox synagogues in 1953 who were Shomer Shabbat. And Rav Moshe said, you can't invite them to come. And even so far as you can, he says you can't have youth programming in your synagogue on Shabbat if the parents will drive their kids to shul. You can't have like appealing programming that will entice parents to bring their kids because the kids are gonna be dry. Like don't think that you're smarter than the Torah. The Torah says if you're going to drive, don't think, oh, it'll be good for them if we, they'll be connected. No, like you're not smarter than the Torah. You're not allowed to drive. Don't do things that will encourage people to drive. According to this position, you couldn't have, your mailing list. You couldn't send out your bulletins, your weekly bulletins, your schedule events to people who didn't live within walking distance. Okay, this is not how most synagogues function, right? Even synagogues where 90, 95, 99% of the membership are Shomer Shabbat, I don't know of a synagogue that is, culling the membership rolls or the email list, distribution list to see, who lives too far. During COVID, what are the COVID highlights? Something I think, the first Rosh Hashanah in COVID, I agreed we like delivered little like honey cakes, I think, or something, or gift bags to everyone because we weren't having only a few people, having this small distance tefillot, which in the end, a lot of we had like, I don't know, like 6 or 7 50-person tefillot in all these different locations, but it was still many fewer people than So I delivered gift baskets like to everyone in the shul. So I agreed to take the far field, distribution. I was like, Erev Rosh Hashanah, I was driving really, really far. I had a list of I was like, wow, these people are, walking really, really far. Okay. I was driving all over the city, leaving these little gift baskets with people. Okay. So anyway, but he has a Rav Moshe Feinstein had a very strict position. I don't think synagogues function that way. I mean, most synagogues don't function that way today. Even if they close the parking lot, keep the parking lot open, whatever. They don't disinvite people who they are presumably driving just based on where they live. But then he says, well, what about, granted, should we separate and form our own separate shul? Again, same kind of question. And he says, to resign from being a member of the synagogue where many worshipers do not behave appropriately is not proper. My own opinion is that one should not resign membership, so there should be someone who protests. And do not despair and say they will certainly not listen, for a little bit of light can dispel much darkness. Therefore, a little bit of protest can confront a lot of isurim. However, all this is when the practice of the synagogue is kosher. But if, God forbid, they change the order of the synagogue, for example, they remove the mechitza, that is between men and women, or they change a detail of the tefillot or the ritual of Torah reading, then all God-fearing people must resign membership. So it's you could say it's kind of crazy that he's saying that, wild, right? Like that he's saying that the mechitza is more important than Shabbat. Okay, like that's right? That if so everyone's driving to the synagogue on Shabbat, still stay a member and protest, and a little bit of light dispels the darkness. But if they take out the mechitza or they change the order, use a different siddur or whatever, then everyone has to leave. So you really see, it makes sense, but it's not obvious that it would have turned out this way, right? Because what he's saying is that the boundaries of, it's about affiliation with a denominational movement. And so if the synagogue ritual is done in an Orthodox fashion, the people who attend the synagogue don't necessarily have to be Orthodox. And the synagogue can be complicit in that because the synagogue is mailing out, yard site letters, come, we'll give you an aliyah, if you show up, you're selling you tickets for Yom Kippur, right? The synagogue is actively facilitating and encouraging these people to come to their synagogue, even though they're going to drive. And that's not okay, but you can still be a member of that synagogue and just be one of those, that minority that believes in Shabbat. But once they change the ritual function, then you have to leave. So you want to, yeah.
Well, first, I would just suggest a distance tax.
No.
If you live more than 2 miles, it is double. That's it.
Okay.
But no, I think the reason I said it makes sense is because if you're an Orthodox person, you want to daven. So as long as when you're there, it's an Orthodox service, it doesn't impinge on your practice. You're not being forced to do something that you shouldn't be doing. If they got there, they do it, on their own, they do things that aren't Shomer Shabbat, that's ultimately their business, right? But if they change the service, then you can no longer actually fulfill your obligation.
I think it does make sense. I think anyone want to raise a counter argument, or what you would, so. I know you're up there. The guy who's, you're up there. You get an aliyah, and the guy there's before you, like, while you hear, he puts his hand in his pocket, and the guy's jingling his keys. Right? It's
His phone plays,
right. His phone goes out, right? So it's you can't, that's the line the rabbi said. Everyone walks to my synagogue. People walk from the parking lot. Some people walk from their home, right? So it's but once they're in, I don't have to care. So that's basically he sort of endorsed it. He's not endorsing that attitude because again, he doesn't think the synagogue should be complicit in this. They shouldn't encourage people to come. But if they do encourage, synagogue actively encouraging people to break Shabbos by driving the synagogue, that's okay as long as they keep the mechitza in. So it's a very, to me, it's not obvious that would be, right. Another example, around this time, Rabbi Soloveitchik said that you should not, if the only opportunity to hear shofar in Rosh Hashanah is in a non-Orthodox synagogue, better to forgo hearing shofar that year. Which again, shofar is a mitzvah d'oraita, and in the synagogue, but you're going to go in, but just don't cross the threshold of a synagogue that doesn't have mechitza. Better to miss the mitzvah that year to retain. So these were lines were drawn that were not obvious that where you would draw the lines, that lines would have to be drawn in that way. I think those who feel this turned out well would say, yeah, but this what saved Orthodoxy was a tiny beleaguered minority in 1950s, 1960s, and from there we got a backbone, and now Orthodoxy is thriving. I think those who look back and say, on the other hand, we're still a small minority of American Jewry, and we sort of lost out on the chance to maybe, I don't know, maybe, different lines, different, could have things could have been different. I would say that, that, yeah. Yeah. You do have many different rights. So this kind of Big Tent Orthodox synagogue, which he's sort of basically saying is okay, those also still exist. So they're also a little bit of dinosaurs, and that's not quite so many of those anymore. Yeah.
If like what would be the solution? Like if you were to say, oh, those people who are driving can't come, so like you're kicking them out of the membership, or because like it's not really.
I don't think he's saying you like bar them from entry. I think he's saying you don't encourage them to come, right? Like that. Yeah.
You're not telling them to drive.
Well, you're saying we hope to see you. We're saying we're writing your address, right? We know where you live. We're writing your address on an envelope, and we're saying send us a check, and we'll give you tickets for Rosh Hashanah, and you put the stamp in, right? That's basically saying.
Say in defense of the people who live far away.
Sorry, what did you say there? Sorry, what?
I said let me try. Okay, in defense of the address that seems far away.
Yeah.
There was quite a long time where I lived in a suburb and davened somewhere else and just spent every Shabbat at someone else's.
That's right. That is true. You're right. So maybe you never know. Thank you, Becca. Good point. You never know what people are, even when the address is what it is. You never know where they're spending Shabbos. That's definitely true.
How do you understand the difference between these rabbis are giving their opinion based on the situation versus a halakha? Like mechitza, you have to have mechitza. But to quote their opinions and saying that we have to follow that today the same way we have to have a mechitza, that's not halakha the same way.
It's all halakha. There's a mix of objective and subjective. There's a mix of like eternal and contingent on the time and place, and it's an art as much as it's a science. And I think that's what you see. Moshe is saying. I think that about the Bima thing, right? Like Sam Sofer felt like this is a red line, and Moshe is saying, I don't know where you got that from. It's like it's nice, but it's not a red line, and maybe it's contention. Yeah. So yeah.
Steve, it's like with over saying, hey, stop, don't change. Rabbi Moshe come to community. He comes here in 1937. The Orthodox community of America is established as becoming what it's becoming. You're gonna have the great influx post-Holocaust, and the effect of that is he's got to accept these are the synagogues.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want you breaking halakha, halacha, but if I can get people to keep going to synagogue versus joining reform and conservative Judaism, which is the gateway drug to atheism and this and that, keep away from the gateway drug. Yeah. But I'm the gateway drug. It feels like that. He's accepting the community. It's an interesting thing.
So you're saying that also that they found themselves in different circles. Sam Sofer was a representative of an established traditional community that was intact, and he was keeping the barbarians at the gate. But Moshe finds himself thrives in America with already as a community with all this chaos and all of this growth and in some places and atrophy in other places, and he's trying to accommodate what already exists. And
the story my uncle tells, my father's uncle tells was when he graduated HTC, there were no jobs.
Yes.
To get admissions in the guy.
Right.
And he was the hero. He was the gadol because he required the Oklahoma City synagogue he was going to go to have the
yeah.
And they set up for the 2 weeks he was there, and then he went back and they went back down. And they changed somewhat.
Yeah.
And he ends up being at Skokie. He went to the Skokie Yeshiva. Why? They said things. I'm sure the answer was there was no job for him.
Yeah. And it was a hard series of decades for American Orthodox.
And so that's what Schweizer's problem is that the Orthodox community is. Synagogues are so be sure Orthodox synagogue.
Yeah, I guess that what I want to end, it's sort of it's what we see from these Tshuvot is a reinforcement of denominational identity, and he's sort of giving halachic weight to these denominational identities in ways that, again, you could have imagined a different set of circumstances where mechitza yes, mechitza no, that's not in the Talmud. It's not in the, that's not going to be our boundary line. That's not going to be our red line. What's going to be our red line is, we don't have any compromise with Sabbath violation, and we're not going to, if we find out you're driving, you're not getting a synagogue honor, and we're not going to accept your membership. We're not going to accept your membership money if you live more than a mile away from the synagogue. That could be you could imagine such a,
The say that he wouldn't accept conservative weddings, he would,
Yeah, that's correct. You so Shiur Teshuva was very strict against non-Orthodox weddings and divorces and all of that and conversions, which also come from this sense of that denominational identity, which is not something that was discussed in classical halakhic literature, is actually something that he felt had tremendous halakhic significance. A whole set of tshuvot that could be folded into this. Okay.
The OU and Skokie, that's what it is, why you when Skokie stopped saying, no, you can't go to traditional synagogue.
That's a good question. I don't know. I think that there's still, I mean, it still happens a little bit. There are still YU Musmachim serving in some of these traditional synagogues. I don't know what the history of that policy change. I probably, Zavelith knows, and he probably writes about it. But I think in the 80s and 90s, it sort of really kind of, a lot of that fell away. And I don't know the precise dates or the precise history of it. And yeah, I mean, I think the Kansas City side has an YU ordained rabbi there at the Kansas City synagogue, I believe. Okay, it's 9:02, so we're gonna pause here. Thank you so much for your participation, and if you can stick around for Tehillim, we can gather in the shul for a few minutes, and then we'll. All right, thank you all so much. All right, have a good. All right, have a good night.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're very, very welcome.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Good night.